thrive after the coronavirus outbreak is completed?
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for the question, because the A68 is an extremely important road in the United Kingdom, running from Darlington and connected to the A720 in Edinburgh, and therefore vital in strengthening the links between England and Scotland. And as the honourable gentleman asked, I'd be delighted to discuss how we can improve this critical network in the United Kingdom with my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Transport, and also Transport Scotland.
Gavin Newland.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Cross-border connections are, of course, vitally important to both the North East of England and to Scotland. And I know the letter from the Chancellor to the aviation industry will have shocked and disappointed Newcastle Airport just as much as it did Scottish airports, Scottish Airlines and all vital aviation support services in and around Scottish airports. So can the Minister tell me what representation the Scottish Office has made to both the DFT and the Chancellor on the importance of support to this vital industry in Scotland?
Clearly, the airline industry and airports across Scotland are crucial hubs, and we need to continue to have them operating as much as possible during these troubling and exceptional times. The Secretary of State and I regularly attend COBRA meetings which discuss a range of issues along with the Secretary of State for Transport, so this issue has been raised on a UK-wide issue, but also with Scotland's input at the heart of these discussions as well.
Jack Barrett.
Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, Scottish exports to the rest of the UK increased in 2018 by 1.2 billion to 51.2 billion. The official Scottish Government figures show that more than 60% of all Scotland's trade is with England, Wales and Northern Ireland. And as a result, the UK continues to be Scotland's largest market for exports and accounting for 3 times the value of exports to other EU countries.
Jack Barrett.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank my right honourable friend for his response. When it comes to trade, would he agree with me that in these challenging times such as these, regions across the country, from my constituency in Stoke-on-Trent South all the way to the Scottish Highlands, are stronger and more secure, working together as a strong union?
Mr Speaker, he won't be surprised that I do agree with him. And I would re-emphasise I would re-emphasise the point that Scotland does more than 3 times the trade with England, Northern Ireland and Wales than it does with the other EU 27 countries.
Stuart C. MacDonald.
Number 5, please, Mr Speaker.
I'm committed to the constructive relationship with the First Minister of Scotland and with other Scottish Government ministers. However, now is not the time to be planning face-to-face meetings, but rather enhancing our virtual relationship and communications. The people of Scotland benefit most when Scotland's 2 governments work collaboratively, and that is absolutely essential in these current difficult times.
Stuart C. MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Would the Secretary of State discuss with the First Minister and indeed the Foreign Secretary the plight of all our constituents who are trapped abroad and feeling really badly let down? For whatever reason, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office seems to be struggling really badly with this. So perhaps it is time for other government departments to help and get involved in ensuring that our constituents can come home.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. You raise a very important point. I think we've all had in our parliamentary inboxes cases of people who are trapped abroad. I had, I think, 5 or 6 cases from New Zealand and Australia only yesterday. I raised them with the Foreign Secretary. The Foreign Secretary did make a statement on it. We are hoping to bring people back, for instance, keeping some airline hubs open. The Prime Minister of Singapore has kindly agreed to keep Singapore open for that purpose. But the Foreign Office is coming up with a plan, and I would encourage all British nationals to register with the High Commission in those countries or the Embassy, get the name on a register and get on a list for when we're able to organise those flights.
Patrick Grady.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of all of us in the Scottish National Party, I would associate our thoughts and comments with those of the Junior Minister and extending thanks to everybody who is helping us get through this crisis. Many of the people in the NHS, the care sector, the delivery drivers, the people stacking the supermarket shelves are European nationals, and it turns out that these are not low-skilled, poorly paid people. These are essential people who are helping us get through this crisis, and I hope the Secretary of State would reflect on that. There are also many people in Scotland who have come to our country to seek asylum and refuge, and many of those have medical expertise and other skills which could help their adopted communities through the coronavirus crisis. So will he discuss with the First Minister and the Home Secretary how and when the right to work can be granted to these asylum seekers who want to help make a difference to our society, not just through this crisis, but permanently?
Well, I say to the honourable gentleman, this is a problem that the issue he raises, which is a UK-wide issue, would be fair to say. But at the moment, asylum seekers cannot normally work while their case is being considered. However, they can volunteer. The NHS England announced a volunteering scheme yesterday. I hope the Scottish Government will also announce a volunteering scheme.
Patrick Grady.
Mr Secretary, for that answer, I hope anyone that is volunteering under these schemes, whether they're seeking asylum or not, are able to feel supported through it. Many asylum seekers are left destitute without recourse to public funds. So to be asking them to give of their time and labour without any recognition, I think, would not be desperately appropriate. On another matter, when he discusses with the First Minister, will he discuss the challenge being faced by many of our distilleries, particularly craft distilleries, who are keen to switch production from products that we all enjoy consuming to products that could help the health sector in terms of hand sanitizer and cleansing product? At the moment, many of these are being faced with duty payments in advance, which means they literally cannot give this stuff away. So can he speak urgently with the Treasury and the Scottish Government to see how we can help our distilleries rise to the challenge?
Yes, and we have done, and the situation is they can register, but we want the HMRC to speed up the registration process so they can register, because once you are registered, the alcohol you use in hand sanitisers is no different to the tax treatment of the alcohol used in food production or many other chemicals, many other things, and that is it's unnatured alcohol, and it is duty-free.
Bob Blackman.
Question number 6, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I regularly discuss with the ministerial team from the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy matters of importance to Scotland, including the significant level of support the UK Government provides to the oil and gas industry. I have been communicating, as I said earlier, with stakeholders across Scotland, one of whom was Oil and Gas UK. I spoke to them last week to ensure the industry are informed about the current arrangements and that we in Government understand the impact of these arrangements on the industry and can support them wherever possible.
Bob Blackman.
I thank my honourable friend for that answer. Clearly, the future for the oil and gas industry in the North Sea is of utmost importance to the UK economy and will have a long-standing view. What measures can my honourable friend introduce to ensure that the industry is protected and enhanced as we move towards a carbon-neutral future?
Well, I wholeheartedly agree with my honourable friend's assessment, and it is crucial to continue to support the oil and gas industry in the transition to net zero. That's reflected in our manifesto commitment to work with the sector on a transformational sector deal. The oil and gas sector are already assessing what could form part of this deal through its Roadmap 2035, which addresses how the industry can be part of the solution to the challenges that the transition to a net zero economy will bring.
Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I ask the Minister to speak with some urgency to Oil and Gas UK about the situation facing offshore workers at present? In the last week or so, I've received representation from constituents who are offshore and have had their crew change extended, so they've had to work extra weeks. And also I've heard from some who are concerned that going offshore may take them into an environment where they are not properly protected. Can he ensure us that offshore workers may well be out of sight, but they will not be out of mind?
I absolutely agree with the Right Honourable Gentleman. They may be out of sight, but they are not out of mind. From the Right Honourable Gentleman as a constituency member, myself as a Minister in the Scotland Office and the Secretary of State as well. This issue has been raised with me by others in the Aberdeen area. Last week I did discuss this and other matters with Oil and Gas UK, and we have a call later on this week to discuss this further. So I will reference the remarks made by the Right Honourable Gentleman and perhaps get back to him after that further discussion.
Alexander Scufford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can my right honourable friend update the House on what discussions he had with the Business Secretary regarding his role as President of COP26 in Glasgow? And does he believe this vital conference will promote the UK as a world leader in tackling climate change, and that we must ensure that it goes ahead after the coronavirus ends?
Understandably, all the efforts of this government and governments around the world are focused on tackling the coronavirus outbreak, but we look forward, hopefully in November, to welcoming leaders from around the globe to discuss this emergency and to hear the concerns and solutions from governments throughout the world. Glasgow will be a hub of these discussions, not just in the 11 days in November, but in the period leading up to and after COP26.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Question 7, Mr Speaker.
Okay. I can't read that. Thank you, Mr Speaker. The UK Government is working in lockstep with devolved administrations, World Health Organisation and our international partners to keep the whole of the UK safe. The UK Government will continue to work closely with devolved administrations as the situation develops to ensure they have the funding needed to tackle the impacts of COVID-19.
Wendy Chamberlain.
I'd add my thanks to the people of Scotland for the effort they are taking so far. I'd particularly call out those in communities who are already volunteering and providing vital services to those that are vulnerable. But in the last 24 hours, I've been contacted by several different local businesses in the self-catered accommodation industry. They thought that they would be eligible for COVID-19 grants for small and medium businesses in retail, leisure and hospitality, but yesterday they discovered that they're explicitly listed by the Scottish Government as not being eligible for these grants. If you operate a chalet, a caravan, a B&B, you're eligible, but self-catering accommodation is specifically excluded alongside ATMs, jetties and pigeon lofts, amongst others. If my constituents operated elsewhere in the UK, they would be supported, and the message from them is clear. Without these grants, the self-catering accommodation industry in Scotland is in peril. We cannot let this happen, and I appreciate this is a really difficult and challenging time for governments, but will the Minister make representation to the Scottish Government to reconsider their exclusions in order to ensure consistency and support and the future of this industry?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for raising that point. It's a really important point, and if you take the self-catering industry, self-catering cottages, that's for rural Scotland, that's a massive issue, not just in her beautiful constituency, but my more beautiful constituency than hers. And, there is going to be an emergency package of measures announced next week. Our colleagues in the Scottish Parliament are discussing that today. We have raised the issue, the Scotland Office have raised the issue already, and we are very keen to see a support package for those rural businesses, particularly the self-catering business and others, the caravan parks. If they're only having residential caravan stayers, then we want them all to be, if you like, supported in whatever way they need to be, because, as the Chancellor said, we will do whatever it takes.
Chris Elmore.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I press the Secretary further on support for freelancers, the self-employed and sole traders? Will he, the Chancellor and First Minister, speak urgently this week to ensure a package of measures are put in place for those groups who need the support? I understand what the Secretary is saying about these things take time, but people are deeply worried about their futures, including paying their mortgages and feeding their families.
Well, first of all, Mr Speaker, it was remiss of me not to welcome the honourable gentleman to his role, albeit it may be a temporary one. A reshuffle's coming, his brief role. But if he's invited back, well, that would be excellent news, obviously. The answer is yes, absolutely. We have been discussing in ministerial meetings support for self-employed and freelancers. We recognise it's a very serious issue, and the government is giving it its full attention.
Chris Elmore.
I thank the Secretary of State. There are 330,000 workers categorised as self-employed in Scotland. These workers need reassurance quickly from the UK Government. The Irish Government has announced a new flat-rate extra payment to those who are self-employed of €350 a week. That, I'm sure he would agree, would be a start while a full support package put into place. The reality is, Mr Speaker, while the self-employed in Scotland or anywhere else in the UK have no guarantees to protect their income, they will continue to work, putting themselves and others at risk. I urge the Secretary of State most sincerely to press the Chancellor to ensure a package is delivered and quickly.
Well, as I said before, I know that the Chancellor has been looking at many schemes, not across the European Union and around the world, and it is absolutely about timing, and I would hope the Treasury will be making an announcement very soon on this.
David Dewey.
Mr Speaker, can I associate myself with the remarks of my right honourable friend and others recognising the health, the emergency services and public services in general, but also add the volunteers and community groups that are active in Banff-and-Buchan and elsewhere in Scotland and around the United Kingdom. Can also welcome my right honourable friend's confirmation that the Scottish Government will receive at least £2.7 billion in new funding from announcements made by the Chancellor in the budgets and announcements since then to support people and businesses through the current crisis. And can I ask him what discussions he's had with the Scottish Government to use that funding to support the rural and coastal economy in Scotland, particularly businesses in the food supply chain?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You're absolutely right. The rural economy in Scotland desperately needs support, and the money that will flow from the strength of the British economy, from that huge £330 billion of loans, guaranteed loans for businesses, for the £2.7 billion of extra funding that comes through the Barnett consequentials, and also, now that my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, is here, as you mentioned, agriculture, only last week, the convergence funding that he rectified in discussions with me when he first came into office, the £160 million, the first tranche of that was paid to farmers in Scotland only last week. So we are right behind the rural economy in Scotland. This government will do what it takes to support the economy and get us through this.
Dean Russell.
Mr Speaker, will my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, and the whole House join me in paying tribute to the former MP for Watford, Tristan Garrell-Jones, who passed away yesterday? Sorry, I'm asking. Sorry, I'll hold it off. Thank you. Apologies.
OK, let's come to Chris Stevens.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Secretary of State of Scotland will be aware that there are companies operating at the moment who shouldn't be. They are defying the advice from his honourable friend, the Prime Minister. So will he raise with the UK Government to ensure that those companies still trading at the moment will have closure orders and will face heavy fines if they continue trading from today onwards?
Well, as the Prime Minister and the First Minister of Scotland have said, it's essential businesses that must carry on trading. And so I think the Prime Minister is here. He will have heard his remarks.
Order. I have a short statement to make about the conduct of today's Prime Minister's question time. It is exceptional. I will run Prime Minister's questions until 1 o'clock. It will serve as an effective replacement for separate statements on the situation of coronavirus. I will allow the Leader of the Opposition 2 sets of questions of 6, so the total of 12, which I expect to be taken in 2 sets of 6. Similarly, I will allow the Leader of the second largest party 4 questions in 2 sets of 2. I will also exceptionally call a further question from an opposition French spokesperson. In order to maximise participation, can I ask for short questions and short answers? We now start Prime Minister's questions with Susanna Webb.
Question number 1, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in the House, I will have further such meetings later today.
Susanna Webb.
Firstly, I would like to pay tribute to the Prime Minister and his ministers for navigating my constituents through these unprecedented times with your decisive action. Tribute also to my constituents and those working in the NHS for your truly heroic work. No one can afford to be complacent during this time, and I applaud the Right Honourable Friend's address to the nation on Monday, which reinforced the need for us to stay at home, protect our NHS in order to save lives. Can he assure me that the Government will ensure the people have the support they need in order to do so?
Mr Speaker, I fully echo her tribute to our amazing NHS workers, and it is in order to protect them and to help them that we are taking the extraordinary measures that this country is, and I repeat my advice to the nation, which is to stay at home, protect our NHS and save lives.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and thank you for making the best arrangements possible today to ensure that as many members as possible can ask questions, but also that the Government is held to account, which is what the function of Parliament is. Many more people will be mourning the loss of loved ones as a result of coronavirus this week. Our hearts go out to all of them and to those suffering from the disease at the present time. Across our country, people are working day and night to keep us safe, fed and warm. Our wonderful NHS staff, police, firefighters, prison and probation workers, teachers, civil servants, local government staff and social care. All of them are showing the value of public service. They are the unsung heroes, keeping the transport system running, the post delivered, utilities running and our supermarkets properly stocked. I'd like to pay special mention to one group that are usually ignored, forgotten and decried as unskilled workers: cleaners. All around the country and in this building are doing their best to keep our places hygienic and safe. Over the past few weeks, I've asked the Prime Minister many times what action is being taken to ensure testing is being prioritised, and I've received assurances that everything that could was being done. Yet, Mr. Speaker, a leaked email shows it was just 3 days ago that the Prime Minister wrote to UK research institutes to ask for help, saying there was no testing machines available to buy. Why wasn't this done weeks ago, if not months ago, when the government was first warned about the threat of a global pandemic, and what action is now being taken to get testing machines?
Mr. Speaker, perhaps I could begin by pointing out that this is the Right Honourable Gentleman's last Prime Minister's questions, and it would be appropriate, I think, for me to pay tribute to him for his service to party and indeed to the country over the last 4 years in a very difficult job. We may not agree about everything, but no one can doubt his sincerity and his determination to build a better society. And I want to pay particular tribute and thanks to him and all his colleagues for their cooperation in the current emergency as far as possible across party lines. I agree with him very much in what he said about cleaners. They do an extraordinary job, and they deserve all the protection and support that we can give them in this difficult time. And on testing, he is quite right that testing is vital to our success in beating the coronavirus, and as the Health Secretary has explained many times, we are massively increasing our testing campaign, going up from 5,000 to 10,000 to 25,000 a day, and in answer directly to his question, this has been a priority of this government ever since the crisis was obviously upon us, for weeks and weeks.
I thank the Prime Minister for his very kind remarks. I believe in a decent, socially just society. And he was talking as though this was a sort of obituary. Just to let him know, my voice will not be stilled. I'll be around, I'll be campaigning, I'll be arguing, and I'll be demanding justice for the people of this country and indeed the rest of the world. We can only protect the health of us all, Mr. Speaker, if we protect the health of our carers. Yet the charity Sue Ryder, who provide care to people with neurological conditions, have said that their workforce is depleting daily as they have no access to tests. When will all the social care staff have access to regular testing? They are very, very important and obviously very, very vulnerable in this crisis.
He's entirely right. I don't want to repeat what I've just said, except to say that social care staff, in common with NHS staff and indeed other public sector workers, need to be tested as fast as possible. And the answer to his question is we will do it as fast as possible.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Obviously, if they have to self-isolate because they suspect they have the disease and can't get a test, then their work is lost for a week. And obviously those that need the care and support don't get it at that time. There are reports that care homes workers are being turned away from supermarkets in relation to priority shopping, not being allowed to buy more than certain items that they desperately need to feed their residents. What is the Prime Minister's plan for making sure that care workers can get the vital food and supplies they need for the people that they're caring for?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as he can and the House can imagine, we've been in regular contact with all the retailers, all the supermarket chains. I had a conversation with all of them a couple of days ago, and they were absolutely determined to ensure that key workers do get time in supermarkets. If there is a particular problem, I will raise it with them again.
Jeremy Corbyn.
I hope the Prime Minister will, because care workers are on the front line looking after the most vulnerable people within our society, and keeping our care homes safe and well should be and must be an absolute priority. The Prime Minister has been saying for quite a long time that NHS staff will get the equipment they need, yet the Healthcare Supply Association, just get that, has been forced to use Twitter to ask DIY shops to donate protective equipment to NHS staff. This is an appalling situation. When will NHS staff, social care staff and community nurses and all other staff relating to healthcare get the PPE equipment they absolutely, desperately need?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can tell him, and he's absolutely right to raise this issue. I know this has been a concern, and we had a long meeting on it this morning, but I'm assured that not only are the stocks there now, the Army is now distributing the supplies to all the NHS staff, all the hospitals that need it, and in the last 24 hours, they have distributed 7.5 million pieces of equipment.
Jeremy Corbyn.
It's important they get it, because yesterday 77% of NHS chiefs who responded to a survey said that the lack of staff testing and staff shortages were the two biggest areas of concern for them. Last week, the Prime Minister stood in this chamber at the dispatch box and said that he would, and I quote, protect private renters from eviction. He absolutely said that. Yet, some renters will be getting eviction notices as early as next week. The Prime Minister appears to have gone back on his word. So will he now finally absolutely ban evictions for 6 months in line with the renewal period of the emergency legislation which is going through its parliamentary process at the moment?
He raises a very important point about the need to protect renters, which is why I answered in the way I did last week. We've actually gone further now, as he knows, by lifting up the local housing allowance to the 30th percentile of median rents, which will be very important for many people on low incomes across the country. But we are also, as he knows, making sure that no-fault evictions are no longer legal, and that is part of the bill.
Well, unfortunately, this isn't what the reality is on the ground, as many of my colleagues will point out. We are getting constituents in touch with us who are being threatened with eviction now because they are in rent arrears, because they cannot work because of the shutdown over coronavirus. Can we just be absolutely clear, and will the Prime Minister make sure it's legislated that nobody can be evicted during this first 6-month period of this emergency from the private rented sector? I'm going to continue my questions shortly, Mr. Speaker, in the second part of this session. But I just want to ask this question to the Prime Minister. Many British people abroad feel a bit abandoned by their government, with many fast running out of medicines, with the host countries in lockdown, flights being cancelled, accommodation cancelled, and insurance either about to expire or not covering the much needed costs until they're able to return home. These British citizens have a right to turn to their own government for help, and hour-long delays on phone calls are not acceptable. They feel abandoned. Can the Prime Minister, as the Foreign Secretary was asked to do yesterday, update the House on what his government is doing to bring people home and provide the emergency costs for the medical needs that many British residents abroad actually have at the present time?
Mr. Speaker, he can take it that we are certainly doing everything we can to bring back British nationals, British citizens from abroad. A huge operation is going on now to repatriate them, as he will have heard both from the Health Secretary and indeed the Foreign Secretary, where we are protecting renters in spite of what he says. We are doing everything we can to protect our fantastic NHS. We are putting, as a society now, we are doing and as a country, we are doing a quite extraordinary thing, which is for the first time in our history, to get through this crisis, we are putting our arms as a country around every single worker, every single employee in this country. And it is a quite It is a quite unprecedented step, and he will be hearing more. And I know there are concerns about the self-employed, but he will be hearing more in the next couple of days from my right honourable friend, the Chancellor. I can tell him that, and I think he said something the other day about this, how this country would come through this experience changed for the better. And there he and I completely agree. And we will get this country through this crisis with these exceptional steps. And I can tell him that we will do absolutely everything that it takes. We will do whatever it takes to get our country through it together. We will beat it together. But the most important advice I can give him as he retires to his I'm delighted to hear he's not retiring, and I think that'll be warmly welcomed by his successor. The most important thing we can all do is stay at home to protect our NHS and to save many thousands of lives.
Bradley.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank my right honourable friend for his leadership and his Cabinet's leadership at this incredibly difficult time, and for the package of measures already announced that will support millions of people and protect them from financial hardship. The government's advice is clear, as he's just said: stay home, support the NHS, protect lives. Can you help more people to make the right decision by giving an absolute assurance to the 5,000 self-employed people in Mansfield that he is seriously considering measures he might take to be able to help them to do that?
I thank my honourable friend very much for raising that, and he's entirely right. I know that thought, as the right honourable gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, has just said, that's uppermost in people's minds. We've produced a quite incredible package to support the businesses and the workforce of this country. We do need to ensure that we protect the self-employed as well, and he'll be hearing more about that in the next couple of days.
Yeah. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I must say, in response to the questions from the Leader of the Opposition, we all need to do what we can to bring all our people home, and it needs to happen now. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister said that the UK is putting its arms round all our workers. I hope that will become the case, because as of today, it's not. This morning, the Resolution Foundation estimated that 1 in 3 people in self-employment, a total of 1.7 million workers, are now at risk of losing their income. In Scotland, that means that 320,000 self-employed people are deeply concerned about the jobs and the families they support. Last Friday, the self-employed were promised by the Prime Minister and by his Chancellor that help was coming. Only yesterday, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury told them, "We have not forgotten you. Help is coming." These are the same promises that have now been made for weeks, and yet they and we are still waiting. Can the Prime Minister now explain why a package for the support for the self-employed wasn't put in place before we announced the lockdown?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as he will understand, we've done a huge amount already to strengthen the safety net for everybody in this country, not just those currently in employment, as I say, with a package so that they get 80% of their earnings up to £2,500 per month. This country has never done anything on that scale before. And we've increased universal credit by £1,000 a year, as he knows. We've deferred income tax self-assessments for the self-employed until July. We're deferring VAT until the next quarter, as he knows. There is access to government-financed loans, but there are particular complexities about the self-employed which do need to be addressed. They are not all in the same position, and all I can say is that we are working as fast as we possibly can to get the appropriate package of support for everybody in this country, and that is what we're going to do, and we will get through it together.
Blackford. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister knows that we want to work with him on this, but there is frustration because we've gone into lockdown and workers are without income. This is an emergency. The truth is that the health and economic costs of this virus are deepening by the day. People deserve strong leadership, financial support, and they deserve straight answers. As we stand here, these people are losing their incomes. Telling them to wait another day simply isn't good enough. In Norway and Denmark, wage support schemes have already been extended to cover the incomes of the self-employed. In Germany, There's a €50 billion programme to ensure the self-employed don't go bankrupt. In Ireland, the self-employed are eligible for a special pandemic payment of €350 a week. The Scottish Government has written to the Chancellor asking him to expand the jobs retention scheme he announced last week to include the self-employed. Can the Prime Minister confirm that when the Chancellor eventually does announce measures, there will be parity and equality of support between the already announced jobs retention scheme and the new scheme for the self-employed? They must not be left behind, Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he's making a very important point, and I totally share his desire to get parity of support. I would just remind him that we have extended mortgage holidays. We are giving all sorts of help, all sorts of interest-free loans to everybody across the whole country. There are particular difficulties with those who are not on PAYE schemes, as I think the whole House understands. We are bringing forward a package to ensure that everybody gets the support that they need. That's the way to get this country through it. But if I may say so, the better we tackle the epidemic now, the more vigorously we're able to suppress the disease now, the faster we will come through it. And that means, yes, it certainly means testing, but it means staying at home, protecting the NHS, and thereby saving lives.
Jen Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Wolverhampton has sadly already seen many cases of COVID-19, and I'm sure the Prime Minister would like to join me in thanking all the staff at New Cross Hospital in my constituency. Would he also thank the many volunteers coming forward to help their neighbours in Wolverhampton, but also say to the few people who are trying to flout the advice to stay at home that their actions will cost lives?
Mr. Speaker, I would indeed like to thank all the staff at New Cross Hospital in Wolverhampton for everything that they're doing. As I thank everybody in the NHS across the whole country. And just since yesterday, when we asked for volunteers to come forward, we've seen a huge number of people, 170,000 people, asking to volunteer to do whatever they can to support, and tens of thousands of doctors and nurses coming back to our fantastic NHS. And I pay tribute to every one of them. Some of them, I may say, Mr. Speaker, in this House of Commons.
Given the critical incident there last week, and tragically that it has recorded one of the highest levels of deaths so far, the Prime Minister will understand that there is considerable concern about the situation at Northwick Park Hospital that serves my constituents and many others. Can he tell the House, therefore, when he expects the staff at the hospital to have access to the high-grade personal protection equipment they need, and crucially to the testing equipment as and when they need it, to keep them safe, to prevent the risk of cross-infection and to keep their loved ones safe?
He's absolutely right, Mr. Speaker, to raise the issue at Northwick Park, and they've had a consignment in the last few days, and we will keep those supplies coming.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's no doubt that our nation and our world is under attack from an aggressive virus which intends to infect every one of us, sometimes with deadly consequence. And it seems to me that in uncertain times we need clarity and leadership, and I want to commend the Prime Minister for the leadership and the clarity he's given in the messages coming from government, where we know them all very clearly, which is to protect the NHS, save lives, and by staying at home. But can I ask the Prime Minister, will you confirm that he will lift any of these measures imposed at the earliest possible opportunity once he knows that our nation is safe?
Yes, of course, Mr. Speaker, and we keep them under constant review, and the more the whole country is able to work together to conform with those stipulations, the faster we'll get on top of it, the faster, Mr. Speaker, we'll come out of it.
Peter Kyle.
Mr. Speaker, through the Prime Minister, can I thank his ministers who have been working very constructively, particularly from the Department of Health, with members from across the House in these difficult times. They have asked us to report back difficult situations in our patch. In that light, I'd like to draw attention to the fact that the Oaklands Care Home in my constituency has had a really difficult time lately. A 94-year-old resident developed the symptoms of coronavirus and requested a test. 10 days later, when the test finally happened, 14 of the 20 residents were exhibiting symptoms. 7 of the staff were off sick so they could self-isolate, they were agency staff who'd also been working in other care homes. None of the protective equipment requested had arrived. Can the Prime Minister tell the House, in the 80,000 care homes around Britain, what date will they expect tests to be carried out on the day that symptoms emerge, and every single person working in those care homes will get the protective equipment they need?
Well, on the tests, as I said earlier on, the answer is we want to roll that out as soon as we possibly can. And on the personal protective equipment, the answer is by the end of this week.
Alexander Stafford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, assure me that he is in regular contact with supermarkets and food suppliers to ensure that goods are getting to the shelves where they are needed? And will he join me in calling on people to only take what they need, not to stockpile, and to stamp out the disgusting scourge of black marketing profiteering?
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker, and I think that profiteering is something that we should be looking at from a legislative point of view in this House, as has happened before in this country. But I can tell him that the supermarkets do have adequate supplies. Our supply chains, as my honourable friend knows, are very good. We've relaxed delivery hours, but it is very, very important that everybody in their shopping acts reasonably and considerately for other people.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to convey Plaid Cymru's thanks to the health workers, social care workers, teachers, cleaners and all those who are fighting this virus on the front line. Today, an elderly constituent telephoned my office in dismay that she and her husband are struggling for ways to get food. Both are vulnerable, both are self-isolating according to government advice. They have been told that the next available delivery food slot is April 16th. What support can the government offer to ensure vulnerable people in remote and rural areas, such as Ceredigion, are prioritised for food deliveries?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm told that there is an army of local volunteers who are delivering food supplies, but if he wishes to communicate that case directly to us, we'll take it up.
Rob Butler. Does the Prime Minister share my concern that the contractors for HS2 Limited are not following the very clear government advice on coronavirus? This is not to be clear about the rights and wrongs of HS2, it is about the safety of us all, because my constituents have seen not only contractors blatantly fail to the rules about social distancing, they've observed them coughing over concerned residents, causing great distress. Should they stay at home to save lives?
Mr. Speaker, we've been very clear that everybody should work at home if they possibly can, and construction should only take place in a way that is in accordance with Public Health England and industry advice.
Tracy Brabin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Charities, including those on the front line of our national response to coronavirus, working with the seriously ill, the elderly, the young, victims of domestic violence, and providing food to the vulnerable, they're in absolutely dire straits, and they face a 4.3 billion drop in income. Furloughing staff providing essential services to the vulnerable is just frankly not an option. When is the Prime Minister going to come forward with an urgent package, as my honourable friends for Cardiff South and Penarth and Lewisham Deptford and 150 colleagues from 8 parties across the House have been calling for, so that they can continue their life-saving work?
Mr. Speaker, she's absolutely right to pay tribute to the work of the voluntary sector, the charitable sector. They are crucial to our national response to this crisis, and so we are indeed looking. My honourable friend, the Culture Secretary, and my honourable friend, the Chancellor, are looking at a package of measures to support charities as well.
John Barrow.
Mr. Speaker, I commend the Prime Minister and all those on the front line for their handling of this situation, and he will know I've raised with him previously the importance of reaching out to all the elderly and the vulnerable who live alone regardless of their health, so that no one is left behind. But as a former Secretary, may I raise with him the plight of the British Council? It is running out of money. They have had to cease their commercial activities, and their reserves will be exhausted within weeks. Can he make funding available?
Mr. Speaker, I came to love the British Council when I was doing the job he refers to. We will continue to support it in any way that we can, and we're actively looking into what we can do.
Oh, Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When all this is over, I think the Prime Minister will genuinely have earned himself a proper break on a paradise island. And in that regard, can I commend to him the paradise islands of Orkney and Shetland, where we have a fantastic tourism offer built up over many decades, but which have at its heart the tour guides, the craft businesses, the small food and drink businesses who are overwhelmingly self-employed. So will the Prime Minister give an assurance today to these self-employed people that when the offer of help comes, they will not be in any worse a position than they would be if they were in employment?
Mr. Speaker, I cannot, in all candour, promise the House that we will be able to get through this crisis without any kind of hardship at all. But what I can tell, and he and I have talked face to face about the issue that he raises, we will do whatever we can to support the self-employed, just as we are putting our arms around every single employed person in this country. And I well understand the point that he makes. And he should be, and as for his generous invitation, he should be careful what he wishes for.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I join colleagues from across this House in congratulating and thanking the Prime Minister for his strong leadership at this current time, which has provided a great reassurance for my constituents in Blackpool South. Will the Prime Minister continue to work with the voluntary sector and charity groups to ensure that vulnerable people continue to get the support they need from this government during this challenging time?
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker, and that's why we've given, in the first instance, another £500 million to councils to look after the poorest and most vulnerable members of society, and I thank him for his support.
Chris Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will have heard my question to the Secretary of State for Scotland. There are companies defying his advice, which is guided for public health and to save lives. So can he tell the House, and for those watching, what the consequences are of businesses who are still operating who shouldn't be today?
Mr. Speaker, where businesses are blatantly ignoring the instructions of the government, then they will face the consequences that have been well advertised, Mr. Speaker.
Jeremy Hunt.
Speaker, can I salute the tone of the Prime Minister's very difficult, sombre address to the nation on Monday night. I know that heroic efforts are happening to ramp up the amount of testing. Could the Prime Minister give us some idea as to when we will be able to get back to routine testing in the community, as happens in Korea and Germany and other countries? And should we not now introduce weekly tests for NHS staff so we can remove from them the fear that they might be infecting their own patients?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can tell the House that both on antibody testing and on antigen testing, we are making huge progress. We're buying millions of antibody tests to show whether or not you've had the disease. And on his point that has been raised several times about how soon can we get NHS staff and other public sector workers tested in advance to see whether they currently have the disease, the answer to that is as soon as we possibly can.
Newland. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thousands of jobs in my constituency and nearly 1 million across the UK rely on the aviation industry for work, from pilots to baggage handlers and cabin crew to security staff and many, many more. The aviation industry is vital now and will be crucial when we come out of this dreadful coronavirus situation. The Chancellor and the Transport Secretary committed to a bespoke support package, but yesterday he wrote to industry to renege on that commitment. Can the Prime Minister tell the industry why his government have washed its hands of it?
I can tell the Honourable Gentleman we have certainly not washed our hands of any sector of UK business or industry. We're in regular contact with the aviation sector, doing everything that we can to help, and already that sector and others have schemes such as Time to Pay and many other loan support schemes already available. But I can assure him, Mr. Speaker, that there are other contacts going on as we speak.
We're going to now start the second part of Prime Minister's questions. I'm going to open with Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and again thank you for making the arrangements that you have today so that more colleagues can come into the chamber. It is a little odd, however, that we're having to have a double session of Prime Minister's question time to question the Prime Minister when he himself should have volunteered to come here and make a statement at some length on the subject rather than just doing it through press conferences and television addresses. This House is the place where the government should be held to account. Construction sites, Mr. Speaker, are still operating, still working on non-emergency work. Despite the new rules, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster said yesterday that sites will continue to stay open. We heard this morning on the radio a call from a self-employed construction worker who said that he had contracted coronavirus, he was suffering from it, he knew he had got it, but had no other option but to get on the London Tube and go onto a site to work, obviously putting himself at greater risk and putting all other passengers and all other workers on that site at risk. Why was he doing it? Because his site had not been closed down. He had no other source of income to feed his family. So he's going to work, making all of us more at risk as a result. So can the Prime Minister be absolutely clear and give unequivocal guidance now that construction work on non-emergency work should stop now?
Mr. Speaker, everybody should work at home unless they must go to work, and every business that can, unless they have an alternative, they cannot do that work from home. If a business is continuing, a construction company is continuing, then clearly they should do so in accordance with the guidance of Public Health England, and they have a duty of care to their employees. But overwhelmingly what we are saying to the people of this country is that unless you need to leave the house to take exercise, for medical reasons, or to buy essential supplies, you should stay at home, protect the NHS and save lives.
Jeremy Corbyn. Obviously, people should stay at home and protect others. But if they have no other source of income, then these very difficult, very personal choices are going to be made, and as a result, we're all put at greater risk as a result of it. The self-employed having to choose whether they go to work or stay at home, or face losing their entire livelihood, relying instead on an overstretched welfare system, which could pay as little as £94 per week. One self-employed person said they need to pay for baby food, rent, council tax and insurance for the car they use for work. Faced with the decision to feed your family and pay your bills or stay at home and not get paid, why is it taking the Prime Minister so long to guarantee income for all self-employed workers? There are millions of them. Our economy has changed.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we are making absolutely clear to everybody in this country that they should stay at home and save lives. But when it comes to the self-employed and the particular pressures that he raises, I think I've now said several times already in this chamber in answer to other honourable members that we are shortly bringing forward a package, and I think that he would recognise that the steps that the government has taken to provide support for workers, for employees in this country are quite exceptional and unprecedented, and they were warmly welcomed, I may say, by the trades unions themselves.
Jeremy Corbyn. Speaker, I'm asking questions about the self-employed and those on 0 hours contract and those with no recourse to public funds who have no support. They are in a very difficult situation, and he should understand that there are many of our constituents, for every member of this House, our constituents lead a hand-to-mouth existence. A few days' pay lost is catastrophic for them. And time again, government ministers have told us that workers affected by the crisis could get help via universal credit. Last night, there were queues of over 110,000 people trying to get onto the DWP system in order to register to apply for universal credit. Will the Prime Minister now put extra resources and funding to boost the DWP capacity and relax the often quite draconian requirements on people claiming, so that money gets where it's needed quickly to those people who've got to feed the kids, got to pay the rent, got to survive somehow?
Mr. Speaker, he's perfectly right, and that's why we've increase the funding for universal credit so that it goes up by £1,000 a year. That will benefit 4 million of the most vulnerable households in the country. And overall, we're putting another £7 billion into the welfare system altogether. And as I say, we will be bringing forward a package for the self-employed. But what we are not doing, and this is fully in accordance with the scientific and medical advice, what we are not doing is closing down the whole UK economy. And you will understand the reasons for that.
Jeremy Corbyn.
We're not asking for the entire UK economy to be closed down. We obviously want people to be safe, but clearly things have to go on. My question was about the DWP resources, which the Prime Minister didn't answer. Well, well, it wasn't an answer that was satisfactory to me. One of his colleagues is claiming it was a yes. I'll take that. So that means more staff now for the DWP, quickly, so we don't have 110,000 people waiting. Yeah, I haven't finished yet. Because my question is, Mr. Speaker, while he's about it, and this will give him time to think of the answer, can he... This is not a time for levity. The statutory sick pay level of £94.25 a week, which the Health Secretary admitted he couldn't live on, and despite promising he would ensure workers get the support they need, we've still not seen action on that. So unless we increase statutory sick pay and give protection and access to benefits for those on 0 hours contracts, then the dangers that we're all aware of people going into work or trying to work when they shouldn't is going to continue. We do need very urgent action on this.
Mr. Speaker, he's absolutely right. This is not a time for levity. It's a time for serious action and a serious response to the crisis. And that's what he's seen from this government. And that's why, from day one, we insisted that statutory sick pay should be payable from day one. That's why we've advanced universal credit. And just to repeat the answer I gave a moment ago, Mr. Speaker, we've increased universal credit by £1,000 a year. That will benefit 4 million people of the poorest families in the country. And yes, we do want to see... I pay tribute, by the way, amongst the many fantastic workers in this country, not just in the NHS, not just in social care, but of course in the teaching profession, but in the DWP itself. They're doing an incredible job. They're facing huge new demands. They're doing an outstanding job. And yes, we will support them. And that's why we're putting another £7 billion, as I said just now, Mr. Speaker, into our welfare system.
I don't want to appear totally negative, Mr. Speaker, but it would be better if the whole place had been better staffed in the first place. But I'll take it for what the Prime Minister said, that there's going to be an increase in DWP staff in order that people can access universal credit more quickly. Mr. Speaker, it's quite right that Parliament is virtually closed today, and it's right that the Prime Minister and Cabinet Ministers continue to deliver daily public information sessions, and that is absolutely correct. However, I understand it's going to be possibly some time before the House meets again, and there has to be scrutiny of what governments do. That is what Parliament is for. That is what oppositions exist for. And so I'd be grateful if the Prime Minister could indicate how, over the weeks until Parliament opens again, he's going to put himself open to some form of scrutiny, electronic, whatever it happens to be, so that Parliament can hold government to account because of the levels of stress and concern of all the constituents that we represent.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Gentleman is entirely correct. I think the way we've tried to handle this crisis is to be as open and transparent as we possibly can with all our working, all our thinking, and I will work with you, if I may, Mr. Speaker, about how we can make sure that Parliament is also kept informed throughout the recess.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. All I could say to the Prime Minister on this is, please make sure you make yourself available for scrutiny by this House and by everybody else, because we represent people who are desperately worried about their health, about their economic well-being, and if you're living in a small flat and you're told to isolate and you have a large family and a large number of children, the levels of stress are going to be huge. The levels of stress throughout our society are huge. It's up to all of us to do what we can to reduce those levels of stress and obviously bring this whole situation to a conclusion as quickly as we can. So we need clarity, not confusion. We need delivery, not dither. This crisis shows us, Mr. Speaker, how deeply we depend on each other. We'll only come through this as a society through a huge collective effort. At a time of crisis, no one is an island. No one is self-made. The well-being of the wealthiest corporate chief executive officer depends on the outsourced worker cleaning their office. At times like this, Mr. Speaker, we have to recognise the value of each other and the strength of a society that cares for each other and cares for all.
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I really want to do nothing else except to associate myself fully with the closing words of the Leader of the Opposition. And I think that what this country is doing now is utterly extraordinary. We are coming together as a nation in a way that I've not seen in my lifetime to help to defeat a disease and to help save the lives of many, many thousands of our fellow citizens. And we all understand that that will involve a sacrifice. But we're gladly making that sacrifice. And the most important point I can perhaps make to the House today is that that sacrifice is inevitable and it is necessary. But the more we follow the advice of the government, the more strictly we obey the measures that we have put in place, then the swifter and more surely this country will come back from the current crisis, the better we will recover. And so I just repeat my message in case the right honourable gentleman would like to hear it one more time. The best thing we can do is stay at home, protect our NHS and save many, many thousands of lives.
Speaker, I echo the words of my right honourable friend. The current position on London transport is that the services have been severely curtailed. In fact, the journeys from his constituency into central London now are every 15 minutes as opposed to every 5 minutes. The result of that is huge packed trains with people who potentially are infecting other people. Clearly, some of those people are being selfish. What advice does my right honourable friend have for his successor of Mayor of London in resolving this particular problem on London transport?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Mayor of London, I can assure him, I understand very well the job that the current mayor is doing, and my own view is that we should be able to run a better tube system at the moment. We should be able to get more tubes on the line. But we will do whatever we can. We will do whatever we. I do not wish in any way to cast aspersions on what is going on at TfL at the moment, because it is an outstanding organisation. What we will do is give the Mayor every support and help that we can to help him through what seem to me to be his present logistical difficulties.
In Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As of Monday, over 3,300 inquiries have been made in Scotland about NHS staff seeking to return to work in order to help us defeat the coronavirus. These people, and all those already working tirelessly within our NHS, are our heroes. Every last one of them, from consultants to cleaners, from carers to nurses, from drivers to maintenance workers, from GPs to paramedics, they are performing vital work to save the lives of others. When this crisis is over, we in this House will need to find some way to honour those amazing heroes. But there is one way that the public can honour and support our NHS staff now, and that is by staying at home. Staying at home and adhering to social distancing will save lives, protect our health and social care services and begin to flatten the curve. We can avoid unnecessary deaths, but only if we all act together. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that we owe it to everyone in our NHS and to those willing to return for non-essential workers to stay at home?
can I congratulate the right honourable gentleman for the splendid way in which he expressed himself just now, and I think that message deserves to be heard loud and clear across the whole UK.
Ian Blackford.
Well, can I thank the Prime Minister for what he has just said? Many members in this House will have had constituents contacting in recent days around evictions. Will the Prime Minister join me in praising Scotland's Community Secretary, Aileen Campbell, who has announced the Scottish Government's intention to use the emergency powers granted by the Coronavirus Bill to protect people from losing their homes? The Scottish Government's plan to impose a 6-month ban on evictions from private and social rented accommodation are as welcome as they are necessary. And will the Prime Minister also join me in sending a message out from this House that in times like this, we need a truly loving and compassionate society? No one, Mr. Speaker, should be facing the threat of evictions at a time of national emergency. Will the Prime Minister send out that message today?
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker. I want to repeat what we're doing and the sense and the thrust of it. It's not just supporting LHA, putting £1 billion more back into supporting the rented sector through local housing allowance, but also stopping no-fault evictions. Now, the difference is between 3 months and 6 months. What I can tell the right honourable gentleman is we will certainly keep that protection under review.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank Broxbourne Borough Council, particularly the leader and the Chief Executive and all its staff, for the brilliant work they're doing, coordinating aid and support across my borough. Fantastic people working with a range of heroes. Prime Minister, there is an army of black cab drivers in and around London, itching to get involved like the Spitfires in 1940. Prime Minister, can we find a way, if we need to get doctors and nurses safely across London, to use these black cab drivers, not on the meter, but perhaps on a contracted basis?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend makes a superb point, and indeed that has already been raised in our considerations. The black cab drivers are a fantastic service. They're an unsung service, and I believe that they can certainly rise to this challenge.
Hilary Benn.
Much indeed, Mr. Speaker. We've already heard about the huge increase in applications for universal credit, and whatever measures the Chancellor comes forward with to help the self-employed will take time to implement. What is the government's plan to help people with no job and no income and no savings in circumstances where they don't have any money at all to buy food? What will the government do to make sure that no family goes hungry?
Hear, hear.
Well, we've already increased universal credit, but what we are doing immediately, Mr. Speaker, to help get cash to the poorest and neediest is to give an immediate grant of 500 million to local councils, and there will be more to come.
Morning, I've been talking to the Solent LEP about the future plans for Waterlooville, my constituency. They are already planning for our recovery after this pandemic. Would the Prime Minister agree with me that this is the opportunity to plan for the future, make sure that we can rebuild a strong economy and become more community-minded than ever before?
I do believe that this country will emerge better and stronger from this experience, and I can certainly tell my honourable friend that a great deal of thought is being given now to the lessons we need to learn from this crisis and how we can turn them to the advantage of the British people in the future.
Is the Prime Minister aware that people are being evicted now, this week, as a result of losing their income, including all of those people who are being turfed out of low-cost hotels where they were being housed either in their own right or by the local authority? Is he aware that all his emergency legislation will do is defer evictions for 2.5 months, storing up a problem further down the line? Can he tell us now what he is going to do to fulfil his government's commitment in full that nobody will lose their home as a result of this crisis?
Mr. Speaker, she's totally right to raise. Of course, the bill comes into force, I believe, later today, or as soon as their lordships have finished with it. But as I said in answer to the leader of the SNP, we will keep the 3 month. It is 3 months, not 2.5 months. The 3 month period under review.
Neil Parish.
Thank Mr. Speaker. Like so many colleagues, my constituency has many self-employed. Farming, food and food production is very much self-employed businesses. Can we be assured that it won't be bureaucracy and the difficulty of setting up a system that stops that help getting to the self-employed? Because it's absolutely essential we cut through the bureaucracy to make it work.
That is indeed the issue, Mr. Speaker. The difficulty is not devising the schemes. We can devise the schemes. The difficulty is getting the cash to the people who need it in a timely way, and anybody who has worked on any of these projects will know that that is the real issue, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, some firms such as Sports Direct or Wetherspoons have shamed themselves by bullying their staff into work. Other businesses are trying to do the right thing but are being let down by their insurance companies, such as events, sporting and conference companies in my constituency. Will the government give a clear direction now that no large events involving large numbers of people should be taking place any time in the near future, and insurance companies need to get their act together?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, the instructions could not be clearer. The enforcement is there, and it is going to be applied, and the message should go out not only to those companies but to the insurers as well.
Anthony Mandel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister and his team for everything they've done so far, and can I associate my words with the member for Tiverton and Honiton about the need to support rural and coastal communities? And with that in mind, what further support might we be able to expect regarding fishermen who are sitting on the line?
Mr. Speaker, he is absolutely right, and he and I have seen the wonderful work that's done by the fishing community in his constituency, and they will receive all sorts of benefits, not least, of course, our ability in due time to take back control of the plenteous resources off the UK coast.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday I spoke with a constituent who suffers from a debilitating rheumatic autoimmune disease, and symptoms of her condition are similar to that of coronavirus. She's concerned that she won't be included in those to be shielded, even though she's clearly at risk, and she's concerned that she's going to end up needing emergency medical help as she takes different medications. Can the Prime Minister confirm that the Government is working with the devolved administrations to ensure that the shielding guidance is consistent across the UK?
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker. We're trying to make shielding guidance as consistent as we possibly can, but in her particular case, can I perhaps advise her to get in touch directly with us, and we'll make sure that she's included.
Ruth Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Nottinghamshire Police are asking local employers to give paid leave to special constables to allow them to help during this crisis. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that every business should be playing its part and that all special constables should be able to report for duty?
Yeah.
Prime Minister.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker, and I should have added the police and specials, everybody who serves in our incredible police force for what they do, and they should certainly be added to the roll of honour.
John Speller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tens of thousands of our constituents are stranded abroad. At the same time, thousands of planes and pilots are sitting idle. Ministry of Defence have unparalleled experience in chartering planes and organising flights. What they need, Prime Minister, is your instruction to do that. So when you go back to Downing Street, will you get onto the Ministry of Defence, tell them to get the airlift started and bring our people home?
Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we certainly, though not every country in the world necessarily welcomes a grey tailfin, as it were, but we will make sure we are working with. Most of them do, I should say. But charters we are certainly commissioning right now, and there is a massive repatriation effort going on.
Richard Holden.
Mr. Speaker, can I put on record the gratitude of my constituents to the leadership that has been shown by both the Prime Minister and the Health Secretary during this very difficult time for the whole country. Coronavirus is showing our NHS at its best, including doctors, nurses and support staff in my North West Durham constituency, but it's also showing the strain in some parts of our NHS, including worn-out parts of the NHS estate. After the coronavirus pandemic outbreak has passed, will he and the Health Secretary work with me to look at delivering a new community hospital to replace the aged one at Shotley Bridge in my constituency?
Mr. Speaker, the short answer to that question is yes. The long answer is this government is in no way undimmed in its ambition to continue record investments in our NHS and build 40 new hospitals, Mr. Speaker.
Stuart C. MacDonald.
protect us all from coronavirus, we need to protect the most marginalised, and that includes asylum seekers, those whose asylum claims have been refused, and all who are prohibited from having access to public funds by Home Office rules. So will the Prime Minister encourage the Home Office to urgently and radically reform its policies so that everybody can access the support and accommodation they need to get through this crisis?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this country will look after all the most vulnerable in society in the way that we always have, and the groups that he mentions will certainly receive the Home Office funding that they need and deserve.
Tom Hunt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The police will play a role in policing the social distancing guidelines outlined earlier this week. This will put an extra pressure on limited police resources, and my concern is that certain criminal elements might look to exploit this moment of national emergency to push their own insidious agenda. Will the Prime Minister promise me and my constituents that we will come down like a ton of bricks on those such individuals?
Prime Minister.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker. The early signs are that criminal activity is not up, is in fact down at the moment, but we will come down like a ton of bricks on anybody who seeks to exploit the situation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The people of Newcastle are desperately trying to do the right thing, although my inbox tells me that they are angry, confused, running out of money, isolated and stranded in some cases. However, not all businesses are doing the right thing, and I am particularly thinking of Mike Ashley forcing workers into empty Sports Direct shops. The Prime Minister said that businesses should stand with their staff. What is his message to those who don't?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the advice to the gentleman, the instructions to the gentleman in question, and indeed every business, is to follow what the government has said, to obey the rules, or to expect the consequences. And that is the best way to look after not just their employees, but their businesses as well.
Craig Williams.
Can I welcome the Prime Minister's approach with devolution? Wales has two governments, and his mature and the Welsh Government's approach has meant we've delivered fast legislation and efficient help. But any divergence on policy or communication causes anxiety for my constituents. The Secretary of State for Health announced volunteering. Sadly, Welsh volunteers can't take place in that scheme, although we're cross-border. Will he get on the phone to the Welsh Government and say, let's work together?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I must say that in general, the four nations of our United Kingdom have been working very, very well together, but we will get on to the Welsh Government this afternoon on the issue that he addresses.
Kerry McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Bristol, we're desperately trying to replace free school meals for children with home provision and other provision, but there's been real problems with the supply chain. How can we make sure that those providing those meals, including Andy Street at Feeding Bristol, I really want to pay tribute to, can get hold of the food that they need so that kids can get good, healthy food while they're at home?
Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I thank her. She's given me an opportunity to say once again that it is our schools, our teachers, everybody who works in the schools who are dealing with an incredibly difficult situation, looking after the pupils of key workers, helping to keep our country going at a very difficult time, and the administration of free school meals, supporting kids who need free school meals, is an absolute top priority of ours. We are working at the moment on a voucher scheme.
Right.
Trying to summarise an MP's inbox right now is not easy, but mine would say self-employed, please help us, and online delivery slots, which ones would they be? I trust the Prime Minister's going to deliver on the first. We've covered it a lot today. But on the latter, what can he realistically, given the demand, what can he realistically do?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we changed the regulations so that supermarkets have got much more freedom in their delivery hours, and obviously one of the things we want to do is to make sure that we support people to help in this, what is, after all, at the moment, an expanding sector of the employment market, and we don't want to be putting up any barriers to online delivery at all.
Can I just say and wish the Leader of the Opposition well on his final question? And can I say to the Prime Minister, you have the wishes of everyone to make sure this country gets through this. Yeah. We now come to the Ministerial Statements. The Lord President of the Council, Leader of the House of Commons, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on the business. Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, the business for the week commencing the 20th of April will include
Monday, the 20th of April, the House will not be sitting. Tuesday, the 21st of April, second reading of the Immigration and Social Security Coordination EU Withdrawal Bill. Wednesday, the 22nd of April, second reading of the Finance Bill, followed by motion relating to the membership of the Liaison Committee, followed by motion relating to the membership of the Scottish Affairs Committee. Thursday, the 23rd of April, debate on a motion on errors in payments made to victims of the Equitable Life scandal, followed by debate on a motion on human...
How do you mean no more commission?
Well, no one in Scotland can commission an idea. You know, if I went to BBC Scotland and I said, oh, I've got this great idea for a sitcom, I've got this brilliant idea for a drama, you know, no, there isn't one person in Scotland that can okay it unless it goes through London.
Good morning and welcome to another edition of Full Scottish. What's happening today?
Hello and welcome to the Full Scottish here on Broadcasting Scotland.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
That need, that desire for independence is ever stronger than perhaps it was in 2014. So there's an obligation that we've got to give leadership to that campaign. That's what Nicola Sturgeon, as our First Minister, has been doing.
My feeling about Boris Johnson is he can't be trusted on anything.
That is now and forever will be known as the rape clause.
I'm old enough to remember going into Europe in '73, and I remember how much of a razor's edge that was a balance stone. And I think we made it by 53%, if I remember correctly, for going in. And ever since that time, England particularly has been pretty much schizophrenic, down the middle about whether it felt British or whether it felt European. And that schism, that crack has remained throughout English society ever since.
Scotland means business. Scotland's voice won't be stilled, it won't be silenced, it has to be heard.
The work that's been done by Broadcasting Scotland in giving community activists, yes activists, Scottish activists a platform other than the traditional media outlets.